Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're in Revelation 6. Let's look at verses 3 and 4 now. Yesterday, we saw the first seal broken, which unleashes the white horse, whose rider is largely believed to be the beast or the Antichrist. Now, it's time for the next horse. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse went out, a fiery red one, and its rider was allowed to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter one another, and a large sword was given to him. Okay, so moving backwards through it, this sword was what? Given to him. So it's not as if God is caught off guard by the violence that unfolds. He is breaking these seals. It is his living creatures, right? Eagle, lion, beast of burden, man, who are telling these riders to come forth. And the sword is given to him. So these are instruments of God's wrath on the earth. But look at the operative phrase here. That people would slaughter one another. So the large sword is given to the rider on the fiery red horse, but we can see that the slaughtering is being done by people. That's unsettling, but it's also mankind being given over to fair treatment. Right? Look at the book of Judges. Each man did what was right in his own eyes, and the book of Judges is like the deadliest, grossest, most violent book of the Bible, probably in the at least in that portion of redemptive history. Good grief, it's shocking. It's shocking. We taught the verse. We taught the book of Judges verse by verse. The series is titled "Failure, Lust, and Loss," and I was worried that people would just be like, "Jesse, please, can we teach another book now?" But the feedback that I got was like, "Wow, this thing could have been written yesterday." It's actually amazingly current, right? So if you're like a seeker sensitive dude, teach the book of Judges, please. And then you won't be seeker sensitive anymore. So look, when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." All right. So this is all by the invitation and sovereignty of God. The rider has been allowed to take peace from the earth and is given a large sword. So we are now 2 seals in. The first 4 seals are the famous 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: white, fiery red, black, and pale green, the pallor of death, if you will. And this is likely only the beginning of the birth pangs, as we see in a couple of famous passages. Now, Matthew 24. All right, I'll kind of zoom over these chapters holistically, but Matthew 24 and Luke 21 have a lot in common, to the point that they're sometimes conflated one with the other. But I hope to show you today that they're actually different discourses that happen toward different audiences and different places at different times. Matthew 24, 7 through 8, "For nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these events are the beginning of the labor pains." So as bad as things are here at the breaking of the second seal, the release of the second of the 4 horsemen, it's going to get worse. Here's Luke 21, verse 9. "When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. Indeed, it is necessary that these things take place first, but the end won't come right away." Here is a fairly quick read through of Luke 21 and Matthew 24. And I'll start by just emphasizing these 2 things, because as I listen to sermons on Revelation, as I read commentaries on Revelation, I hear these 2 conflated quite a bit. And only one of them actually takes place on the Mount of Olives. Look, "He looked up and saw the rich dropping their offerings into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow dropping in 2 tiny coins. 'Truly, I tell you,' he said, 'this poor widow has put more in than all of them. For all these people have put in gifts out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on.'" Okay, that's the beginning of Luke 21, the widow's mite. When I was at Southern, there was like this case, and it had mites from the first century. and it was kind of funny. I was just sort of I was sort of like perusing all the artifacts on display, and actually, I think the guy who was like the head of the doctoral program just happened to spot me, and I was like, I don't know what the odds are, and he finished my sentence. He's like, "There's a chance that one of these is the mite that the widow had in Luke 21." As some were talking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, "These things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left on another that will not be thrown down." "Teacher," they asked him, "so when will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?" Then he said, "Watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name saying, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Don't follow them. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. Indeed, it is necessary that these things take place first, but the end won't come right away." Okay, so there's verse 9 in the larger context. It comes on the heels of Jesus prophesying that the temple is going to be torn down, that not one stone is going to be left on another. And so they ask for signs for when this will take place. And he says, look, indeed, it is necessary that these things take place first, but the end won't come right away. The postmillennialist view, the partial preterist view that most of what happens in Revelation has already been fulfilled in ancient Rome, would point to this text, because the question is asked, when will these things happen? And it's asked of the dismantling of the temple. And Jesus's answer is, look, you're going to hear a lot of people claiming that they're me and that the time is near. Don't follow them. When you hear of wars and rebellions, don't be alarmed. Indeed, it is necessary that these things take place first, but the end won't come right away. So in the postmillennialist view, you look at this and you say, okay, Luke 21 is about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70, because this was fulfilled literally when the Romans were convinced that, like, with gold dripping from the ceiling of the temple, that there must be gold between the walls. And so they dismantled it brick by brick. In fact, one of those stones has been preserved in the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. And a guy that I led to Christ sent me a photo of him standing with his hand on one of those stones. So that's definitely been fulfilled quite literally. But it's also on the heels of this teaching, the end won't come, on its heels comes this teaching, the end won't come right away. So he's going to talk now about various things that you'll recognize as like the great woes that are coming on later in Revelation 11 and 12, for example. Then he told them, "Nation will be raised up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be violent earthquakes and famines and plagues in various places, and there'll be terrifying sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to bear witness. Therefore, make up your minds not to prepare your defense ahead of time, for I will give you such words and a wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will even be betrayed by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. They will kill some of you. You will be hated by everyone because of my name, but not a hair of your head will be lost. By your endurance, gain your lives. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that its desolation has come near." So this again is another postmillennialist biblical case for the abomination of desolation, referring to the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70. Only biblical caveat is that indeed Jerusalem's going to be surrounded by armies again, and you're going to see the Antichrist proclaim himself to be God, right? And this is something that hasn't happened yet. Right, but I definitely see where they're coming from when you read Luke 21. "Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those inside the city must leave it, and those who are in the country must not enter it, because these days are of vengeance to fulfill all the things that are written. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath against the people. They'll be killed by the sword and be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled." So this literally did save lives. This warning was taken literally by the original recipients. And you can see this qualifier that was taken literally in both Matthew 24 and Luke 21 this generation will not pass away until all these things are fulfilled. And so when that's taken literally by the original recipients, they're looking for armies to surround Jerusalem. And when the abomination of desolation occurs, they got to get out of town. They got to get out of there. If you're on your rooftop, don't come down. Head straight to the street and get out of Jerusalem. Get out of Judea. Right? Get as far away as you can. And when Domitian, was it Domitian who dispatched Titus? Like it happened. And the Romans ransacked Jerusalem in the year 70. And many of those who first received that message, that warning from Jesus, were indeed alive, and they saw it coming. They heeded the warning. They got out of town. And so Jesus saved several lives. There was one who speculated there wasn't a single Christian in Jerusalem when it happened. When the Romans surrounded the city, the Christians were already gone. Many of whom were Jewish believers as well. But when it was interpreted literally by those under the persecution of Rome, it saved lives. But the scope broadens when you get to verse 24, until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So this is something that covenant theologians and post-millennialists actually have very much in common with dispensationalists. All right, the time of the Gentiles. When the fullness of the Gentiles, meaning when their sin has reached its peak, and there's not going to be, you're going to see God turn his attention back to Israel and the 12,000 young virgin men from each tribe. Dan notwithstanding, we'll talk about why. That's God dealing with Israel again. That's the end of this time of the Gentiles. And so post-millennialists have more in common with dispensationalists than they might understand. There'll be signs in the sun, moon, stars. There'll be anguish on the earth, among nations bewildered by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and expectation of the things that are coming on the world, because the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, stand up and lift your heads, because your redemption is near. In verse 25 of Luke 21, okay, it begins with the widow's mite. When you get to verse 25, suddenly we find that point of harmony, where now post-millennialists agree with their dispensationalist brothers, because we're definitely talking about Jesus coming back here. And there's a similar threshold, I want to say it's in verse 29 of Matthew 24. And hopefully I can show that to you. Then he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put out leaves, you can see for yourselves and recognize that summer is already near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth pass away, but my words will never pass away. This could be the primary verse that leads to the interpretation held by partial preterists that all of Revelation's events were fulfilled in ancient Rome, especially in the year AD 70. The only thing remaining is the return of Jesus Christ. And it's because verse 32 says, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. And that's a pretty strong point, because it literally did save lives historically. But there's another view of this verse. It's about the generation that sees the fig tree and all the trees. And as soon as they put out their leaves, you can see for yourselves and recognize that summer is already near. You start to see signs happening. Okay, where we don't know the time or the hour, but Jesus rebukes people for being able to tell when it's going to rain, but not being able to tell the signs. Right? And it's designed to keep us vigilant. Now, if verse 32 is literal and it applies only to the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70, then the preterists are right. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. All right, but look at this. Be on your guard so that your minds are not dulled from carousing, drunkenness, and the worries of life, or that day will come on you unexpectedly like a trap. For it will come on all who live on the face of the whole earth. The scope just went global. as of verse 35. So is it possible that this is simultaneously about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70, and then this warning applies actually to the whole globe? Is it possible that it's about both? Be alert at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. During the day, he was teaching in the temple, but in the evening, he would go out and spend the night on what is called the Mount of Olives. Then all the people would come early in the morning to hear him in the temple. So these last couple of verses seem kind of like logistical detail, but they also are what gives rise to this sort of conflation of Luke 21 and Matthew 24 as the both the Olivet discourse. But remember where this one took place. It begins with the story of the widow's mite. He's walking out of the temple. He's walking out of the temple in both Luke 21 and Matthew 24. See this? He looked up and saw the rich dropping their offerings in the temple treasury. All right, so that's where he's at here. And then they're talking about the temple, and that's what gives rise to the question about when the overturning of every stone of the temple will take place. Now look at Matthew 24 and just simply read the text and what the text says. That's my primary rubric, all right, for eschatological view is what does the text say? As Jesus left and was going out of the temple, sound familiar? His disciples came up and called his attention to its buildings. He replied to them, "Do you see all these things? Truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down." So far, it seems very much like Matthew 24 and Luke 21 take place in the same exact spot. It's just that Matthew doesn't include the story of the widow's mite here. Look at verse 3, though. While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples approached him privately and said, "Tell us when these things will happen, and what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So this is on the Mount of Olives. Before, the text indicated that he's by the temple and he's speaking. Right? See this in Luke 21? Right? He's see the widow's mite in verses 1 through 4, and then verses 5 and 6. The people, some were talking about the temple and how it's adorned with beautiful stones. And then they ask him when it's going to come, and he says, "Watch out that you're not deceived." And then it's at the end of the passage, right, that it points out the need for watchfulness. It's going to fill the whole earth, not just Rome and Jerusalem, the whole earth. And then it says that during the day, he's teaching in the temple, but in the evening, he would go out and spend the night on what is called the Mount of Olives. Okay, back again to Matthew 24. Looks pretty similar in the first couple of verses, but verse 3 indicates that this is likely at night because Luke 21 says that he would spend his nights on the Mount of Olives. And in the day, he was in the temple. So Luke 21 is given during the day by the temple. Matthew 24 is given at night on the Mount of Olives. And it's private, verse 3 says. He's just talking to his disciples. And what they're asking about is the sign of the second coming of Jesus and the end of the age. So is it possible that Luke 21 was indeed specifically about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70? And then there's that pesky verse. I don't want to call it pesky because it's the word of God. There's that very important verse that indicates it's global in scale. And then Matthew 24 maybe is about the end of the age and the second coming of man, right? Because I think it's pretty clear just by looking at the passages that they're different discourses, right? Jesus replied to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and they will deceive many." We saw the same thing in Luke 21, right? "You are going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, because these things must take place, but the end is not yet." Right, so this is a larger context for what we saw earlier from Matthew 24. "For nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of labor pains." So pre-tribulationists and mid-tribulationists, you likely believe that the earth is going to get worse and worse and worse. If your take is that the rider on the white horse, the first of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, is the Antichrist, then things are not good, okay, on the earth. But they're going to get even worse when the abomination of desolation takes place. The Antichrist, the beast, calls himself God in the temple. And then it's the greatest season of suffering that has ever been known since nations existed. Verse 9, then they will hand you over to be persecuted, and they will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. Then many will fall away, betray one another, and hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, because lawlessness will multiply. The love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. This verse is very important in terms of global missions, and it just simply has to be read for what it is. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. And so if you come upon someone whose particular passion is global missions, and maybe you'll encounter this from, say, the Joshua Project or the Lausanne Conference, and then some teams within the International Mission Board, it's based on Matthew 24:14, the belief that while by doing this, they are facilitating and fulfilling the will of God for the second coming of Christ. If there's like a nation that we haven't reached yet, then introducing the gospel of Jesus Christ there is like paving the way for Matthew 24:14 to be fulfilled. And so I don't think that they are of any delusions as if they're going to incur the second coming of Christ. Such a missionary would say, like, no, it's foreknown of God that I would do this, and if I happen to be the one who first brings the gospel into that nation that hasn't heard it yet, then I just so happened to be the instrument that was on the table when God operated that way. I'm not causing God to do anything. Now, verse 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on the housetop must not come down to get his things out of his house, and a man in the field must not go back to get his coat. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Do you see the similarity between Matthew 24 and Luke 21? But they are not identical. Luke 21 made no mention of Daniel, for example, but then it does suddenly get very similar to Luke 21. And a man in the field must not go back to get his coat. This is also in Luke 21. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for at that time there will be great distress, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world and until now, and never will again. This is important because Luke 21 does seem to really fit the bill for the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, except for, was that the 35th verse that describes it as actually happening on a global scale. Matthew 24 seems to lend itself more to a prophecy of the abomination of desolation, referring to a future event involving the Antichrist in the temple, proclaiming himself to be God. All right, and that would put us, like possibly 3.5 years away from the breaking of the first seal. Okay. Now, the fact that such suffering will never happen again, to me, in verse 21 of Matthew 24, leaves no room for the great tribulation after this. And so this consistently from throughout Daniel and Revelation and Matthew's gospel here, the great tribulation is reserved biblically as the 3.5 worst years ever that ever have been or ever will be. And through that biblical framework, verse 21 could not be about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70. And in fact, the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70, as shocking as it would have been, to watch the second temple, the one that was, rebuilt by Zerubbabel, and the fellowship was reestablished by Ezra, and the wall was eventually rebuilt by Nehemiah. To see that come down would have been terribly shocking. But those who took this in the first century, who took this as a warning about the tensions between Rome and Jerusalem, literally, they left town. It actually then minimized the number of casualties. Right? It reduced the number of casualties because they looked at this warning literally, and we're about to get to Matthew 24's this generation will not pass away line. Okay. But remember this, that verse 21 needs to be taken into consideration. Again, is it possible that it's talking simultaneously about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70 and the abomination of desolation at a future event wherein the beast proclaims himself to be God? Unless those days were cut short, no one would be saved, but those days will be cut short because of the elect. All right, so that suffering is insane, but it comes to a stop because God's not a sadist. And when he allows this affliction to visit his creation, it serves its purposes, just like the flood did. So God's not in a perpetually bad mood. Rather, he's just and he's righteous. He's holy. He's pure. He's good. He's actually loving and gracious and incredibly patient with us. So when he does pour his wrath out, there's always deliverance. There's always a remnant. There's always those people on the ark, for example. There's always like Lot and his family delivered from Sodom and Gomorrah. Those days will be cut short. Okay, it is set to happen for a time. Verse 23. If anyone tells you then, see, here's the Messiah, or over here, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Again, another very strong commonality with the text of Luke 21, but they're not identical. Take note, I have told you in advance. So if they tell you, see, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. Or see, he's in the storerooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Now we're about to hit that threshold where everybody agrees. Right? I think it was in verse 25 of Luke 21, where it's about the Son of Man coming on the clouds. Acts chapter 1 opens with Jesus going out on the clouds, and then these angelic beings tell them in there, look, you're going to see him return just as he departed. Okay. This describes it happening globally and instantaneously, like lightning. All right. As far as the lightning just flashes across the horizon, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. All right. So you're going to see signs and indicators. You see a vulture doing a circle in the sky, you immediately know what it means. There's a carcass of an animal beneath that. And so you look to the sky and you read the signs, right? You're going to see the Son of Man across the globe. I think this is describing Revelation 19, the coming of the Son of Man. And we'll see the signs in the sky and we'll know what they indicate. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened. The moon will not shed its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So I think by verse 29, I don't want to speak for post-millennialists, but I think that by verse 29, all the ennealists and Asianists in the Christian world suddenly agree. We're talking about something that hasn't happened yet, right? But watch, that this generation will not pass away line still hasn't appeared in the Matthew 24. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn. Okay, look, again, there's that global scale. All the peoples of the earth. This is a sign that appears in the sky. And they will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now, this gives rise to an important point within eschatology that needs to be clarified. Some people can get confused about what was taught as the rapture. Maybe they read the Left Behind books as a kid by Tim LaHaye and Jeremy Jenkins. I want to say that they've kind of maybe walked some of that stuff back. I don't really know that for sure. Just heard it. So, if anybody knows anything about that, maybe let us know in the comments. But either way, let's say that you read Left Behind and that kind of shaped your eschatology. Because you're like, okay, wow, this looks like it comes from an authoritative source. I mean, that's that's a good, maybe this guy's a good Bible scholar. And I just found these books not even at the Christian bookstore, but even in the Christian section at Barnes and Noble and Books A Million, and it just describes in narrative form, in fictional narrative form, the dispensationalist view that includes a literal rapture of the church. It takes the words harpazo or rapturo, which we call rapture, and basically what that means is that I think there's coffee in that cup, so I'll use this one. Hey, look, my collection of empty coffee cups, which by the way you guys can't even see. There's more down here. It's really bad. I gotta just. My wife's like, I want coffee in the morning. This is what harpazo means. All right. For those of you just listening on a podcast, perhaps, like, I just snatched the coffee cup up. That dispensationalist secret rapture view, it's not necessarily the same thing as the second coming of Jesus. Okay, this is a point of confusion, right? The day of the Lord, where Jesus shows up and the blood of his enemies reaches the bridle of his horse, versus this rapture. I suspect that covenant theologians and dispensationalists actually might agree on this. You have passages like 1 Corinthians 15, which we're going to, again, bring up later on in this study, that describe in the blink of an eye everyone. And I think even a stricter interpretation of the Greek would mean like the movement of the eye. It's even faster. Will not all fall asleep, will not all physically die, but will be changed instantaneously to meet him in the air. Okay, that had nothing to do with Darby, had nothing to do with the delusions of a teenage girl, that had nothing to do with what many covenant theologians attribute dispensationalism to. It actually came from 1 Corinthians 15. The twinkling of an eye, that's where that comes from. It's 1 Corinthians 15, as Paul is talking about the resurrection body. And he's saying that not everyone will fall asleep, but some will be changed instantly to meet him in the air. And that's where Left Behind was really coming from. That's that strict view of 1 Corinthians 15, that's what that was about. Okay. And dispensationalists think of that as an event that comes before the second coming. And some of them are kind of confused as to what I'm even talking about right now, right? You've got two different events. Like, even as a kid, I think I was confused when I heard the second coming. I would conflate that with, the rapture, and they're not necessarily the same thing. But either way, we all believe, dispensationalist and covenant theologian alike, in what's called the Bema Seat judgment. But where does the Bema Seat judgment happen chronologically in the book of Revelation? There's not a clear indicator as to when. And I think that mystery of the timing of the Bema Seat is the same thing that leads to this confusion. Like, are the rapture and the second coming different things? Are they the same thing? I think that's actually what gives rise to some people being dispensationalists and some covenant theologians. Because we all believe in the Bema Seat, and I believe it happens in Revelation 19. The Great White Throne judgment is explicitly stated. Okay, you can see that spelled out, and most of our modern Bible translations even give you like a title, the Great White Throne Judgment. All right, we know when that happens in sequence, and it happens to come at a time in Revelation where everybody agrees that we're moving chronologically. But covenant theologians have to deal with 1 Corinthians 15, this twinkling of an eye, meeting him in the air. Not everybody's dying, but they're going to face him in judgment. I believe they would refer to that as the Bema Seat judgment, but then you have to give me a clear verse in Revelation that says this is when the Bema Seat judgment happens, right? Because it's not as clear as the Great White Throne judgment. It's not as clear. The fundamental disagreement here really is that dispensationalists think, pre-tribulationists think that's already happened at our point in Revelation. We're just at the beginning of chapter 6 here, and pre-tribulationists believe that that's already happened. And covenant theologians would believe that doesn't happen until chapter 19. Right? But you both believe that it happens. You both believe that we as Christians must stand before God, give an account for all that we've done. The Bema Seat judgment then is more akin to the pardoning of all your sin. And even as we see like crowns of life, crowns of glory promised in Scripture for those who conquer, for those who endure, that's an administration of those crowns. That's a strong opportunity. The belief of the Bema Seat judgment. That's a strong opportunity in the chronology of Revelation for that to happen. So the Bema Seat judgment is definitely the happier of the two judgments, either way. Whether you view the Bema Seat judgment as something for a Christian to sort of dread, that compels you to not sin today, which could be a good application of it, or you believe it's more like the medal ceremony at the Olympics. For you, because you endured this, you get this crown of life, and you get this crown, you get this crown, you get this crown, and then we imitate the elders, and we have these crowns now we can lay at the feet of Jesus. It's kind of their purpose. Either way, you're then kind of talking about a hierarchical experience, like a stratified experience for glorified believers in heaven. There are those in heaven who will just have been snatched out of the flames. They're not complaining, okay? But then you also have illustrations from Jesus about John the Baptist describing him as the least here on earth, but the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. What does that indicate about being the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? That there are those who don't have as much fun in heaven as John the Baptist will, right? And man, for anybody who gives a rip, I think John the Baptist deserves to have more fun than me in heaven. All right. He literally lost his head over it. So we haven't yet arrived in Matthew 24's iteration of this generation will not pass away. Let's see where that comes up. All right. But we're now going to arrive on another teaching that those who believe in the rapture attribute it to. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. So I think that covenant theologians and post-millennialists look at this as the Bema Seat timing. And mid-tribulationists would actually agree. All right. So post-trib guys, you actually may have something in common with mid-tribulationists that you don't realize. But that's assuming, okay, so watch me on this, that trumpet is the seventh trumpet. So as we get to the trumpets, this will make more sense. Don't worry, if you're totally lost, it's okay. Like, it's confusing for Bible scholars have been disagreeing over this for forever. But we've seen the first two seals. The seventh seal starts the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet starts the seven bowls of wrath, and the seventh trumpet happens at the midway point of the whole tribulation. So you've got like vanilla flavored tribulation and then the great tribulation. And that great tribulation begins at the seventh trumpet. That's where mid-tribulationism comes from. 1 Corinthians 15, in fact, even uses all the language from which we get the idea of the rapture. That all happens, according to 1 Corinthians 15, at the last trumpet. That's the one verse that makes the strong case for mid-tribulationism. All it takes is one verse, by the way. But that's where mid-tribulationists come from. And that's where they actually do, they might even have a mostly harmonious discussion with a post-tribulationist about this verse. He will send out his angels with a loud trumpet, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Right? So this gathering up of believers, this is what those who deny the rapture, you got to deal with passages like this because it definitely describes something like that happening. And again, go look at 1 Corinthians 15. We will later in the series. Learn this lesson from the fig tree. Luke 21 had a fig tree. Matthew 24 has a fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. When I had just started off in student ministry, there was somebody who posted something that made it viral online. Not only was it Harold Camping predicting like the end of the world, but it's debatable, but you can often see the fig tree as symbolic of Israel. When Jesus walks past a fig tree and curses it, it's immediately adjacent to the account of him overturning the tables, one of the multiple times that he did. And so he's condemning them for their fruitlessness. And he's angry with Israel for her fruitlessness. And he weeps for Jerusalem, longing to gather them in like a mother hen gathers her chicks, but they were not willing. They were not willing. Right? That's also soteriologically significant. But here's the fig tree again. Learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branches become tender and it sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So this is also strikingly similar, but not identical to Luke 21, because we go from the fig tree to the truly, I tell you, not this generation will certainly not pass away until these things take place, both here in Matthew 24, and then also, sorry if I'm making you seasick by scrolling back and forth so much. I just want to show this It also happened similarly here. Okay, here we are back in Luke 21. Then he told them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put out leaves, you can see for yourselves and recognize that summer is already near. In the same way, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Strikingly similar, not totally identical. Okay, we've got fig tree. Truly, I tell you, this generation, heaven and earth will not pass away, but will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Scrolling way back down to its complement in Matthew 24, there's the fig tree, and then truly I tell you, this generation, and then heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But look, this is a critical difference. In the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. That was not in the Luke 21 text. Okay. Verse 36. Now concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, except the Father alone. Really rare moment Christologically, in which we can see something that the Father knows, but the Son does not. As the days of Noah were, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. For in those days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day Noah boarded the ark. So this means that you're just going about your day. When you look at this text, it just describes how people didn't see it coming. All right, God was at work. Noah was building the ark. That salvation, that opportunity to be saved from the wrath was approaching, but they didn't know it. They're just eating, they're drinking, they're marrying and giving in marriage. Okay, I mean, like a man is marrying a woman, a father is giving his daughter away in marriage. It means they're just living life. Okay, like picture that opening scene in any like epic scale, cataclysmic, apocalyptic movie that involves The Rock. What was this? San Andreas? Or that one with John Cusack. Was that 2012? Picture like the scenes before the earthquakes and all that stuff. People are like, hey, we're citizens at a barbecue. Life is great. That's what this is describing. All right, they're eating, they're drinking, they're marrying, they're giving in marriage. Jesus uses similar language, answering and kind of responding to this riddle on levirate marriage, which I just talked about a few devotions ago. Speaking of Boaz and the scroll in Revelation, like we're going to be more like the angels in heaven. We're not going to people won't marry nor be given in marriage. All right, it doesn't look good for this view, but there's like this teeny tiny view that's like, well, maybe that means that there are no new marriages in heaven. All right, but the Jesus is clear. We're like the angels in heaven. I've just told my wife, like, well, you and I will just get married again. And I'm joking when I say that. Please don't troll me. All right, look, for in those days before the flood, they're eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day Noah boarded the ark. They didn't know until the flood came and swept them all away. This is the way the coming of the Son of Man will be. All right, so again, we should all agree at this point. He's talking about the second coming. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding grain with a hand mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. But know this, if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed alert and not let his house be broken into. This is why you are also to be ready, because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So, from a clear reading of the text, in Jesus' own words, he's talking about the coming of the Son of Man, and no one knows when it'll happen. All right, so definitely don't arrogantly put a date to this. Now, if you recognize some of this imagery, those who believe in a literal secret rapture would point to this text, and post-millennialists would disagree. Because the dispensationalist take on verses 40 through 43, or really just 40 through 42, is that you've got 2 men in the field, and then the one who's taken is the Christian. They're like, see, this is the rapture, and one of them is raptured away. 2 women are grinding grain with a hand mill, and one's taken and one's left. And the dispensationalist view is like, oh, see, the one who's taken away, that's the Christian. snatched up into the sky in the twinkling of an eye to meet him in the air. And that therefore be alert, since you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Right? So it's clearly about the coming of the Lord. But there's another view of this, and it's sort of the converse of that. That it's actually bad to be the one who's taken. And in this other view, I think this is more the postmillennialist view. You got two men in the field, and the one who's taken, bro, that's the great white throne judgment. Like that's Jesus showing up, and then everybody has to stand before God in judgment, right? And so depending on where you place the Bema seat in the great white throne judgment, it depends on whether or not you believe that it's good to be taken in Matthew 24 verses 40 through 42. One thing is for sure, this is about the coming of the Son of Man. Okay. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master has put in charge of his household to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom the master finds doing his job when he comes. So the mystery of the timing is deliberate. We must now be ever vigilant. In our study, the Gospel of Luke, we also looked at the parable of the virgins, right? You got to keep your lamp lit and be ready at all times, because you never know when he's coming back. This is the reason for the mystery of the timing. And I'll submit to you, it's also a reason for these eschatological disagreements in the Christian faith, because not one of us knows for certain when the Son of Man is coming back. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But if that wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, that servant's master will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour he does not know. He will cut him into pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? So, this is why, right here, my master is delayed. No one wants to be that guy who thinks that or says that. This is why every generation of pastor has taught that the coming of the Son of Man is imminent. This is why. Because you don't want to be that guy. I mean, it's true. I genuinely do believe like it could be tomorrow. And I look back on, even like just New Testament church history, and like everybody's felt like it could be any moment. And I feel the same way. And so you could make the argument, well, hang on, Jesse, if he hasn't come yet, then, maybe he's not coming for a while. I mean, like if every generation of Christian thought that he would come in that lifetime and he didn't, then that means that every generation of Christian has been wrong. But I wholeheartedly disagree. This text is why every generation of Christian has believed that the coming of the Son of Man could be any moment. And this has given hope to every generation of Christian for the resurrection, right? For the second coming of Christ, the righting of all wrongs, the administration of ultimate retributive justice. Every generation of Christian has believed it. And every generation of Christian has lived expectantly. And it is foolish to be the one who gets up and says, Jesus is not coming back until the year 3000, fill in the blank. That is the same thing as saying, my master is delayed. Because what could your motivation possibly be for giving such a prognostication? An overt disobedience to what Jesus said, and starts to beat his fellow servants. Okay, this is a particularly abusive pastor or teacher or influencer or whatever you will. All right, that wicked servant who says, my master is delayed. All right, so they're actually... It's attributed to someone who just wants to get away with abuse and just wants to get away with carnal pleasure and doesn't want to actually repent, doesn't want to be about the business of the Great Commission, doesn't even feel compelled to repent from sin right away. All right, that's a wicked servant. That's a non-Christian. Look, he's even cut up into pieces and assigned a place with the hypocrites where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So it's only non-Christians that would say that. And if that's you, if you're my skeptical friend who is tuned in just to kind of maybe brush up on Revelation and try to even get into the fray and argue with Christians about this, like, be warned by that, because that was written for you. That was written for you. And moreover, even if I do answer the fool according to his folly, so that you know, like if I do answer the fool according to your foolishness. No disrespect. I'm just quoting, I'm quoting Proverbs about you right now, my skeptical friend who thinks that it's wise to come in and try to spread the rumor, the idea that like Jesus won't come back for thousands of years. If he hasn't come back yet, he's not coming back now, right? Analyze the logic behind that for a moment. Yes, that's right. I'm using logic because I know logic himself. I know the Logos. He's Jesus. Okay. Logic is a Christian ideal. It's not yours. You believe in spontaneously self-generating universes. Okay. So logic is my thing. Let's use logic. Because he hasn't come yet, he's not coming. Right? That is a non sequitur. What he's told us is that we don't know when he's coming. And guess what? We don't know when he's coming. And he's left prophecy this way. In such a delineation, it's such a well-kept secret that even the Son doesn't know. All right, as is recorded in Matthew 24. Only the Father knows. The devil doesn't know. The power of lawlessness is on deck and waiting. We saw that in 2 Thessalonians 2 in yesterday's devotion. So it doesn't follow to say that because he hasn't come, he's not coming. Or because he hasn't come yet, he's not coming for a long time. That's based on nothingness. And it amounts to the intellectual equivalent to, nuh-uh. That's all it really is. You're just saying like, I just don't believe Jesus. And no one's impressed by that. We get it. We know that about you. All right. No one's like shocked back on their heels and like, oh no, my whole world is turned upside down. You made an atheist out of me because you don't believe in Jesus. Like, we're not impressed by that, bro. Get over yourself. Like the second coming of Jesus is a mystery according to Jesus. So it has no basis to say that the delay in his coming, as we would perceive it, is reason to expect more of a delay. There were some like false prophets that came up. I mentioned Harold Camping. There was another sort of craze that sort of attributed the re-establishing of Jerusalem as a nation in 1948 as the fig tree that precedes those teachings. Not one generation will pass away. Some guy somewhere said that a generation meant 70 years. And so 70 years beyond May 14th, 1948, like I was a young youth pastor and this teaching goes out there and I was like, oh boy, here we go. And then sure enough, like that I think that's partly what led to the Harold Camping thing. And it was totally based on this extra biblical idea that like a generation means this number exactly. That was what led to that. And he ended up doing the polar opposite of what the text says to do. And then, oh man, all my skeptical friends on the internet just had a field day pretending like that was Christianity proper. But we've now made it through Luke 21 and Matthew 24. And I hope you see that they are in fact different things. They are different teachings. There's one way to look at these passages, like where Luke 21, that's given by the temple during the daylight. Matthew 24, that's given on the Mount of Olives, which according to Luke 21 would have taken place at night. That's where Jesus went at night. And then it's clear based on verse 3 of Matthew 24, this is a private discussion between Jesus and his disciples. And it's Matthew 24 that mentions Daniel, even with this, to me, deeply convicting parenthetical, the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. Let the reader understand. I'm like, yes, Lord, let me understand. So we referred to this in Daniel, and as promised, here we are again. All right, so here is another take that I hope brings some I hope that it brings dispensationalists and covenant theologians together. All right, that it's clear in Luke 21. It would absolutely be convincing to me that that's exclusively about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70 if it were not for, was that verse 35, that this is actually something that is global in scale. Okay, let me be thorough. Yeah, verse 35, like a trap. For it will come on all who live on the face of the whole earth. If it weren't for verse 35 of Luke 21, I could find a really strong case that this is just about the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70. And then Matthew 24 is not the same discourse. Wow, do they follow the same structure and have parallel elements, but there are things included in each that are not in the other. And so there's a hot take out there that Luke 21 is about mostly the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70. Verse 35 takes it up a notch to show how this is actually also about the Antichrist proclaiming himself to be God. Matthew 24 then is much more about the apocalypse, the second coming of Christ, looking beyond Matthew 24. And so that begs the question, well, maybe that's not really the proper use of begging the question. Then it prompts the question, rather, not one generation will pass away. Like that's sort of the wording in some translations, but the text says this generation. I think the CSB does an accurate job of translating the Greek here, this generation. What is this generation? It's the generation that beholds the fig tree coming to bloom, and you can tell that it's summertime. All right, that like he's right outside the door. Okay, that the second coming of the Son of Man is nigh. This generation that sees the vultures circling, that generation that sees those signs, it's not going to pass away until the Son of Man appears. So in short, it's possible that Luke 21 is about AD 70, except for verse 35, and that Matthew 24 is about like the rapture and about this the Parousia, the coming of the Son of Man. Right? One thing that is definitely clear based on my prime rubric of what does the text say is that these are different teachings given to different audiences in different places at different times. Okay, verse 21, we're at the temple. Luke 21, we're at the temple. Matthew 24, we were at the temple. And then in verse 3, while he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately. Okay, so if nothing else, some of you guys are like, probably like, Jesse, I'm more confused now than I was before. Right? I do see a harmonization of the two views. Jesus's advice, when applied literally by the first recipients, did save lives, which means that was not the global scale. The sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70 didn't involve the replacement of, like the placement of a false god in the Holy of Holies. We don't see a man of lawlessness proclaiming himself to be God in the temple in the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70. And so it's certainly left desolate, but it's not, strictly speaking, an abomination. And in Matthew 24, Jesus is very clear, let the reader understand, when you see the abomination of desolation take place. That had already happened in Antiochus Epiphanes IV, but Jesus is talking about it as a future event. And there's no such self-deification proclaimed in AD 70. There were greedy Roman soldiers on a treasure hunt. That's what happened in AD 70. And because of this warning, people got out of town, right? And so Matthew 24 specifically does name the abomination of desolation as it appears in Daniel, which we've already studied verse by verse, partially for this very reason right here. All right, so I can see it serving a dual purpose. And this is not the only time that I've seen scripture serve a dual purpose. All right, this beautiful duality to the text is evident. We just did this in Psalm 34. A beautiful word of comfort to those who are hurting, but in the larger picture, it's a fulfillment. It's a prophecy of Christ on the cross. It's even quoted in John's passion narrative as fulfilled. It's beautifully clear. Same thing with the prophecy of the birth of Solomon, and you can see how it's also prophesying the birth of Jesus. Solomon is disciplined when he does wrong. Jesus never sinned, so that can't be about Jesus. But also, Solomon's throne definitely ended. Okay, we've studied Ezekiel. We've studied Daniel. Like, we know that the Babylonians ended the Davidic line with King Zedekiah. All right, so what's the deal? What happened? Well, it's not just about Solomon. It's also about Jesus. There are numerous passages that prophesy two simultaneous events. And I think that some of it is because in the Western tradition, we think of prophecy as a prediction of a singular future event. Whereas in the Hebrew context, you might actually have a pattern that is echoed multiple times, which is actually cooler when you think about it. Right? You can make the case for that abomination of desolation archetype, that prophetic type fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who definitely did abominate the temple. And then the sacking of Jerusalem in AD 70, not so much an abomination, but definitely a desolation. And then Jesus using that as an archetype for the future event of the Antichrist, the beast, proclaiming himself to be God in this third temple. Okay? So there's a reason that biblical scholars have disagreed on this. You can see the biblical case for post-tribulationism here, but then you get to verse 35. It's like, man, maybe it's about both. You can see where people get the idea of the rapture, and it's not just the Left Behind series. It's Matthew 24. Like, you could read Matthew 24, and you could get that idea from it. You could also see how that could be the converse. Is the person being snatched up going before the great white throne or the Bema seat? And at the center of all of this, I think what would give more clarity and maybe illuminate how we don't disagree as much as we thought we did is, when does the Bema seat judgment happen? Because what covenant theologians refer to as the Bema seat judgment could be the same exact thing that dispensationalists refer to as the rapture. Christians called up to face God, right? So hopefully this brings some clarity. I do see a duality to the text, just as I've seen in numerous passages scripture-wide.